History repeats itself. History repeats itself. History repeats itself. I guess you get the point. You've heard that history repeats itself, but does it really? The Greek historian or philosopher Heraclitus argued that you can't step in the same stream twice. And what he means by that, if you would walk in the French Creek and step in there, and then you did so 5 minutes later, you're looking at different water. You're looking at a different situation. Indeed, to him, change was a constant. So, does history repeat itself? Is it even worth studying? Well, there are certain patterns in history that we see repeat. I heard one historian argue that whereas history does not really repeat itself, it's like a burp of a lunch that you ate a couple hours ago, that you could taste some familiar taste, but it's not the same taste that you had when you had lunch. Well, I guess the point is some argue that history kind of echoes. And I would, that's probably a more tasteful way of looking at it. But the fact is, history does bear witness to many patterns, patterns that are very useful for us to understand, because whereas we might argue that every day and every moment is unique, there are certain patterns in human experience that we could see, and those experiences, I think, are pretty important for us to appreciate. Now, for example, let's take a look at this. 1918 in March, it's a soldier who has influenza. Take a look and see if any of these pictures seem to be repeating. We have scientists there working on attempting, using microscopes, which I think you'd find familiar, attempting to try to understand what was going on back in 1918. See doctors exploring. That's an autopsy, actually. So they're looking at a human body that had been ravaged. American soldiers gargling, and they gargle as a preventative measure for influenza. But meanwhile, they're gargling and spitting at each other. So this probably would not be something that we would repeat today in an attempt to try to deal with an infectious disease. So generally speaking, does history repeat itself? Well, we're going to take a look at a very important and tragic aspect of American and world history. And we have to go back 102 years to the last truly global pandemic that had a pretty significant impact on America and on the world. In 1918, we need to get some context here. We are in the last year of the bloodiest war the world had yet known. World War II was still a few decades off. And a pandemic flu known as the Spanish flu is going to unfold upon the world, and it's going to be the first case in history where an epidemic, a pandemic, is going to impact everywhere on the earth. Now, you may have heard of bubonic plague, which swept the earth in a much earlier period, although it's still around. But the fact is that bubonic plague that struck before 1492 never made it to America. No Americans for 1492 were dying from bubonic plague, simply because the vector of carrying the disease, that is the transmission, the movement of people, products, and pathogens across the ocean, really wasn't working at a speed that could facilitate a pandemic disease. So we're going to look at 1918 and see, whereas not perhaps the repeat of history, but perhaps some very insightful echoes.